we're going to be looking at the philosophy of time, which is something that thinkers have been discussing for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Thousands, probably, actually, if we include Eastern philosophy as well. And to do that, we're looking at a very famous article in the history of Western philosophy, The Unreality of Time by McTaggart. Now, McTaggart was a pretty big name in early 20th century philosophy. He was an English metaphysician, Hegelian thinker, so his philosophy is centered around the philosopher George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who was a notoriously difficult thinker. But one of the reasons why we're looking at him today is because he's an idealist, just like Berkeley, that we looked at before. I tried to impress upon you last time that this view of idealism is not completely crazy, okay? It's a view that's been around for a while, and it actually has some contemporary manifestations as well, more particularly in the philosophy of Bernardo Kastrup, who argues that, well, reality is fundamentally, ultimately based in consciousness somehow. And he backs that up with contemporary physics, field theory, and quantum mechanics. So it's not a crazy view, even though it's not a view that we're normally used to hearing. Y'all chose to look at this piece. And what McTaggart is going to argue is that our experience of time does not seem to line up with what time actually is. We think time is this objective feature of our reality, but he puts forth the idea that, like some other thinkers have throughout history, time might just be a feature or a structure of human consciousness. It's how we perceive the world around us, but it is not something intrinsic to the reality in which we live. It's not intrinsic to objective reality. And we're going to look through his arguments today. I'm going to do my best to present them to you in an accessible way. But the philosophy of time is really tough. I mean, how do we talk about this stuff without getting confused and twisted up? So we'll do our best. I don't want you to feel like in order for this lecture to be a success, you have to completely understand everything he's saying. Primarily, what I want this lecture and discussion today to do is just give you some things to think about in regards to this issue. Hopefully we can use this piece, this article, as a portal or a doorway to just thinking and talking about this stuff. So we'll go through the article, what he has to say, analyze his arguments, the best way I can present them to you on this day in which I'm very tired and out of it. And then I hope to just kind of have a discussion about this stuff and see what you all think about some of the fundamental questions in the philosophy of time. So does that sound okay? All right, cool. Let's get into it. If you're going to understand what McTaggart is doing here and the kind of arguments that he's putting forth, you need to kind of know what the philosophy of time at the point in which he's writing is based on. Well, during this time, and still today, we have thinkers talking about two different conceptions of time. The A series and the B series conceptions. These sound complicated, they're not. I've written them on the board over there so that you have another place that you can reference in our discussions today. If you conceive of time according to the A series, basically you're conceiving of time as a bunch of successive events, and they are ordered or represented in such a way as some of these events are in the past, some are in the present, and some are in the future. And there are differences between the past, present, and future. These are different times, right? But also, time has a particular direction to it. If time flows, what direction does time flow? From the future to the past? No, from the past to the future, right? That's what the A series says. We can divvy up the events in the universe according to whether they're in the past, the present, or the future. The present is always changing, and, well, the nature of an event is somehow tied to whether it's in the past, present, or the future, and whether or not we can perceive it. This is one way of thinking about time. It's the colloquial understanding. This is how we all kind of talk about it, right? But then there's also the B series of time. Some people have issues with the A series because, well, if you think hard about that picture, there are certain problems with it, and we'll talk about that today. The B series thinks about time a little bit differently. Instead of thinking of events as being in the past, present, or future, the B series conceives of events basically in their relation to one another. Some events are earlier than other events. Some events are occurring at the same time as other events, and some events are occurring after other events. And so we don't need to invoke these ideas of past, present, and future to talk about what the series looks like, where the events are in relation to one another, how they occur. So these are two ways of thinking about time. And McTaggart's analysis is going to be based around analyzing these two conceptions of time and then showing how there are kind of some problems going on with conceiving of time in these different ways and trying to argue that time is a real thing, a real intrinsic or objective feature of our universe. Now, you all know the name of the article, The Unreality of Time. Based on that, what do you think McTaggart is going to be arguing here? Yeah. Yeah, and say more. What do you think he's going to mean by time isn't real?
Because our perception of time is subjective, there can be an objective basis behind time.
Yeah, he's going to use that as evidence. He's going to bring forth some logical arguments. But basically what he's going to say is this idea that time is an intrinsic feature of our reality doesn't seem to be right. Yeah.
I was gonna say, like, maybe we all perceive it differently. Like, some of us perceive it in the A way, and others perceive it in the B way.
We all do kind of perceive time differently, don't we? What's one of your favorite bands? Just throw a name out there. Who'd you like to go and see?
If they were all still alive, Fleetwood Mac.
Fleetwood Mac, great choice. If you're at a Fleetwood Mac concert and you're really enjoying yourself, is time going to pass quickly or slowly for you? Fast, right? If you're really enjoying yourself and you're really into the moment. Now, if I brought you to a heavy metal concert and you don't like that music at all, is the music going to drag on or is it going to speed by? It's going to drag on and you're going to be like, why the hell am I here? This sucks, right? So certainly we perceive time differently, right? Depending on our current mood, what's going on around us, all of that stuff, our dispositions, our desires, our preferences. So it certainly seems to be the case that our perceptions differ with respect to time. Sometimes we perceive it as going faster or slower than others, or faster and slower than other events in our lives. That's true. McTaggart's going to talk about that a little bit. But he's going to do what all great philosophers do, and he's not just going to rely on our perceptions of time to build a case against its reality, but he's going to provide some interesting logical arguments as to why he thinks our conception of time, that is, it is an objective feature of our universe, is wrong. So he's going to argue that time is unreal because our descriptions of it, our conceptions of it, are either contradictory, circular, or insufficient. And he's going to do that by interrogating these two different conceptions of time. We can separate the article into a few different parts or phases. First, he provides for us what is a phenomenological analysis of time. Then he talks about the problems with these series, these ways of conceiving of time. Does anybody know what phenomenology is? What is it?
Study of experiences.
Right. It's the study of experience. See, the phenomenologists, those who study this and talk about this stuff, they take one of the idealists' claims very seriously. What we have access to is our experience. And so what these thinkers try to do is try to uncover kind of the way reality works and how it is like by looking at it through the lens of our experience of reality and what the nature of our experience and the structures of our experience imply about what all this is and how it works. So, McTaggart starts off by talking about our experience of time. What is it like? How do we talk about it? What does it seem like to us? He starts off by making a descriptive claim about what thinkers throughout the history of philosophy have thought about time. He notes that many have thought that time is unreal. Or at least it's not what we think it is. It's unreal, or it's an illusion. And he cites Hegel and Kant and Eastern thinkers as well. Within the Eastern tradition specifically, there is a theme in which it is argued time is an illusion, or it's unreal, or it's not what we think it is. Kant, more specifically, said that time is not an intrinsic feature of reality. We perceive time because that is how our consciousness is structured. Time is a structure of consciousness. So we are configured in such a way that we perceive time and we perceive succession of events and all of that. That's just how we see things. But it's not a feature of the universe, if that makes sense. And then Hegel has an even more complex view, but we're not going to get into that right now. And nevertheless, despite this, we certainly talk and act as if time is real. We have these experiences which we think represent some inherent feature of reality. Our whole work schedule, our school schedule, daily life is built around time, right? Structured around this idea of, oh, it's 4 o'clock, I got to be here. Oh, now it's 9 o'clock, now I got to do this, right? So our experience of time seems to form both an A series and a B series, or is based on them at least. That is, we think about time in terms of past, present, and future. We orient our lives around that. We talk as if events are in the past. Some are in the present, and some haven't happened yet. And we talk about events happening before and after one another. We invoke these ideas. We live our lives according to these ideas, right? We experience change in the world, right? There's change happening all around us. You can hear the vents blowing. Wind is coming out of them. The weather doesn't stay the same. That changes. Your cells grow and die and are reproduced. Your mind changes, right? There are developments there. You get stronger, you get weaker, you're happy, then you're sad, all of this stuff. So we experience change in the world. We talk as if past, present, and future make sense, or are real. But that's not all. Our experience of time is more complex than that. I've invoked one idea already that we rely on very heavily. When I was talking about the music example, right? I talked about this idea that there is a flow to time. Time seems to move faster for some, slower for others, depending on what's going on. So we seem to experience some kind of flow to this thing called time. We seem to experience that time has a direction, right? It's not like Groundhog Day where we keep reliving the same day over and over and over again like a circle, right? No, we get older. We develop. Our life changes and progresses. There's a progression. There's a development. It has a directionality to it, right? So it seems as if our experience is pointing in the direction of time being an intrinsic feature of our existence, independent of us, right? If we're going to expand our horizons, then, we better investigate this thing. We better try to find out if our experience actually matches reality. And that's what McTaggart tries to do in this piece. He's going to provide for us, well, kind of an analysis of these experiences and some logical arguments for why he thinks that what we conclude from these experiences is incorrect. We don't actually really get it. Somehow our understanding or our views of time are contradictory, circular, insufficient, or involve some sort of infinite regress, which we'll be talking about today. But before we get there, let me poll y'all. Do you think time exists independently of your perception as a feature of reality? Raise your hand. It seems to, right? If you die, time is still going to go on, right? Things are still going to change. Do you think if everybody were to die, time would still keep going? Okay, I see some more nodding of heads. Do you experience time having a flow? Some things feel longer than others, shorter than others, right? You spend 3 hours on your phone at night, you're like, oh my God, that was like 18 minutes. That's what that felt like. Or you close your eyes and then you open them, what seems to be a split second later, and you slept in 2 hours longer than you thought, you would. Okay, so we have an experience of a flow. Some things are faster, some things are slower. And then we experience a direction. The question at stake is all of this just in our heads? Or is it actually representing to us how reality works? We're not going to be able to get to the bottom of that today, but I'm going to give you a lot to think about. Some things perhaps that you can, mess with your friends with. See what they think about this stuff, okay? Does anybody have any questions so far? Do those make sense? The A series and the B series? These are just ways of thinking about time. Okay. All right, well, let's get into it then. We'll talk first about the problems that McTaggart shows us with the B series of conceiving of time as, well, primarily just a description about the relation of events to one another. His basic argument is going to be this. The B series alone is not sufficient to describe time. So this conception doesn't seem to have everything that we need for a comprehensive theory of time. Why not? Well, think about it this way. Let's say you have a series of some kind. We can talk about a series in math. Let's lay it out like this. Here's a series. E1 comes first, then E2, then E3, then E4, and so on. Call these events 1, 2, 3, and 4. What does the B series say? Well, we can explain time just talking about how events are related in succession to one another. So, for example, E1 comes before E2. E2 comes before E3. E3 comes after E1. E4 comes after E2. E2 comes before E3. You get it. It's a series. The problem with this is that this idea of time simply being a series, like a series of numbers or anything else like that, is that it doesn't seem to fully capture our experience of it and doesn't seem to fully capture what's going on in reality that we associate with time. All these things are discrete events. They exist in relation to the other events in the series. But how can this description account for change? Things change, right, in our reality? Are you the same person you were 5 years ago? No. Is that building out there the exact same the way it was yesterday? No, maybe there's a new pool of water somewhere. Maybe, somebody scraped off one of the particles and it has one less particle in its walls. Things change in our reality, and we seem to know that this is the case. Organisms evolve, planets and stars move, things are constantly in motion, right? There's change. This view of time doesn't seem to be able to explain or account for change.
Also, I was kind of thinking, think about how many millions of events happen between E1 and E2. There's not enough numbers existing to represent how many events actually occur.
Well, yeah, so that could be a problem depending on how we think about this. We could just, label these events as successive moments, So this is the first moment, and then the next moment, and then the third moment, however long those moments are. That's a question we'll talk about later. What is the duration of events? What is the duration of the present? Is the present just like an infinitely thin slice? Or is it longer than that? We'll talk about that. So the first problem is that this theory doesn't seem to account for change. According to this view, objectively, certain events are earlier or later than other events in the series, right? It doesn't matter how you're looking at this, or when you're looking at this, or where you're looking at this. E1 objectively always comes before E2, and so on. E4 always comes after these, and so on. But by breaking events up like this into discrete things, how can we make sense of evolution, change, development, progress, and so on? It doesn't seem like we have the necessary conceptual tools and explanations there. Make sure I'll just leave that. But things seem to change, so what gives? He goes through a long kind of drawn out argument about, well, maybe we could talk about this in terms of relations or terms of qualities. But if an event is what it is, if it changes into something else, say this transforms, and then we call that new event E2, well then E1 no longer exists, but if this whole series is to make sense, these need to maintain their identities, all of this stuff. It's kind of weird. We don't have to get into the nitty-gritty of it right now. In essence, what he thinks about the B series is it does not seem to be required to make sense of time, and it does not seem to fully explain our experience or our ideas of it. we can talk about and explain time without having to evoke this idea of objective relations before and after at all. And if you're having a hard time seeing this, I'll upload the notes later, as I always do. So much for B series. What about the A series? Well, unsurprisingly, McTaggart is going to poke holes in that as well. Oh, this is better. Can anybody remember what he says about the A series? There's a lot in there, I know. Well, let's kind of walk through it for ourselves, logically, step by step. Are the dinosaurs still around? No, right? They died a long time ago. Unless you count birds as dinosaurs or something. But at some point, the dinosaurs were living in the present, weren't they? And at some point, the dinosaurs were, even further back in time, the dinosaurs were in the future. And they hadn't come into existence yet, right? The weird thing about this A-series view of time is that we talk about things being objectively in the past, or in the present, or in the future. But it seems as if events are all three. Because at some point, they'll be in the past, at some point, they'll be in the present, and at some point, they were in the future. Right? So, how do we make sense of this? Events are past, present, and future, but they're also only one of those, depending on what time you're looking at it from? That seems weird, right? Does that make sense? Maybe we could wiggle out of it with some kind of semantic argument. But if we're going to hold on to this idea that there is a real objective difference between the past, present, and future, we're going to have to come up with a better explanation of how events are one of those now, but also at the same time all three. So that's the first issue. Okay? Another way of putting this is it would seem that any event is past, present, and future, but these are incompatible. We know that if an event is in the past, it's not in the future. If it's in the present, it's not in the past. If it's in the future, it's not in the present, and so on. So it seems to both be each of these and only one of them, which is a contradiction. You ready for an even more difficult problem? A headier issue? Let's go back to the dinosaurs, right? let's call that the time at which some of the dinosaurs live is T1. Okay? Pick your favorite dinosaur. When it lived, that's T1. Okay? Let's call T2 the time in which the human ancestors, the Neanderthals, lived. Okay? And then let's call T3, time 3, present day. The time we're living in right now, right? January 29th, 2024. And then let's call T4 the far future, where we have lightsabers and teleporters. Okay, group these times based on past, present, and future. Which one's in the present? This one, right? Present day, duh. All right, so this is the present. Present. Okay, which of these, or which one of these is in the past? It's actually both. Yes. This is in the past. Okay, and then what's the only one left? T4, and that's in the future, right? So I'll just say future. We talk as if events are in the past, present, and future. This is how we make sense of our reality. And if time flows, it seems as if it's carrying us into the future, right? So events that will be in the future eventually will be in the present, and then will be in the past, and events that are in the present will be in the past, and events that are in the past are going to be further in the past. But notice what we're doing here when we're talking about events being in the past, present, and future. McTaggart is going to say we're engaged in some circularity. How or why? Well, talking about events being in the past, present, or future is circular because to do that, we need to invoke the A series of time. We need to assume that we can somehow step outside reality or our own minds and look down and objectively characterize events as being in the past, present, or future. But this is the very thing that's under contention. Right? Does time work this way? How can we know? And then the problem more specifically that he's trying to get at is, in order to talk about the past, present, and the future, we need to invoke the idea of past, present, and future. So it's like a circular conception or a circular definition. In order to talk about this, we need to have some sort of conception or idea of it already. But then notice what happens, right? Then this is the next problem that he gets into. In order to objectively talk about what's in the past, present, and future, and talk about that, and make sense of that, we already need that. But then, if we recognize that and we accept that, well, in order to have that standard, that concept, we already need to have an idea or a conception of past, present, and future. And you see what's going to happen, right? In order for any of these conceptions to make sense, it's like it keeps going. This is what we would call an infinite regress. We constantly have to invoke time to describe time. And so he says, the difficulty may be put another way. If we avoid the incompatibility of the three characteristics by asserting that M is a present, has been a future, and will be a past, we are constructing a second A series, within which the first falls in the same way in which events fall within the first. It may be doubted whether any intelligible meaning can be given to the assertion that time is in time. But in any case, the second A series will suffer from the same difficulty as the first, which can only be removed by placing it inside a third A series. The same principle will place the third inside a fourth, and so on without end. You can never get rid of the contradiction, for by the act of removing it from what is to be explained, you produce it over again. So in order to help you grasp what he's saying, let me invoke this idea of the flow of time, because I think you could see it more clearly there. Okay? Raise your hand if you think time has a flow. Okay, so time has a flow, right? It's going like this. Does anybody do any rafting or know anything about rivers? Or bodies of water, or currents? How fast does a river flow? Let's say a meter per second. How fast does time flow? One second per second? Let's call it 1 second per second. You see what we're doing when we're describing the flow of time? We need to invoke time. So this is like the flow of time, and then this is like what we need to invoke to make sense of how fast it flows. Notice what we've done here. We invented another dimension of time to make sense of the first. And then you see the problem, right? Okay, well, how fast is that? Well, that's obviously 1 second per second. Okay, how fast is that? Well, that's going to be 1 second per second of another, and so on and so forth. So the same kind of idea applies here to the A series. In order to make sense of time, we have to invoke time. But that's the very thing under scrutiny, under contention. Okay? So it leads to an infinite regress. Or as he says in the piece, an infinite vicious circle, or an infinite vicious series. As in the case of the flow of time, in order to describe the rate at which it flows, we need to invoke a second time. Well, what is that? Well, in order to make sense of that, we'd have to invoke a third time. In order to make sense of that, you see the thing, the issue? That's basically what he's saying with regards to the A series. First of all, as we saw before, it seems as if any event is one of them, but is also all three of them, and that's a contradiction. And then secondly, explaining that events are past, present, or future is circular. And then third, it leads to an infinite regress. It would be like trying to explain the word explain using the word explain. Right? What's the definition of an explanation? Well, it's an explanation. It's like, no, that's circular, right? You haven't answered the question. You haven't really described it. Okay? That's what he's saying when he's saying it's circular. Our conception or description of time is circular. We need to invoke time to make sense of time. And then if we're talking about this further, or talking about the flow of time, it leads to an infinite regress. And so what he thinks he's showing here is that because our understanding, our conception of time, has all of these issues, but at the same time, it seems we need to invoke the A series to make sense of time. It seems as if time requires the A series, but the A series runs into logical contradictions and circularity. So he thinks that should lead us to believe that this thing that we're trying to describe is not really a part of reality. If the explanations that we need to make sense of it are contradictory, there's something going wrong there. And that's what he ends up saying. Time seems to require the A series, but the A series doesn't make sense. We can't make it logically make sense. I told you this was going to get heady and weird, right? Yeah, the philosophy of time is, well, it's a brain teaser. It's a puzzle. So, the B series is not fit to describe time. The A series, it seems necessary for us to invoke that to make sense of time, but the A series itself is contradictory or circular or leads to an infinite regress. And so he says this on page 470. We have come then to the conclusion that the application of the A series to reality involves a contradiction, and that consequently the A series cannot be true of reality. In other words, things are not objectively in the past, present, or future. And since time involves the A series, it follows that time cannot be true of reality. Whenever we judge anything to exist in time, we are in error. And whenever we perceive anything as existing in time, which is the only way we ever do perceive things, we are perceiving it more or less as it really is not. It's an illusion, or it's a structure of how we perceive, not an actual objective feature of reality. So why do we talk as if time is objective, as if events are in the past and they're staying there? Things are objectively in the present, or things are definitely in the future, they're not here yet? Well, it's just because we experience the reality like that. That's just how we see things. And it doesn't seem to be something we can get around or something we can turn off. Our perceptions and our mental states explain why we describe events in these terms. The problem is that when we, starting from our mental states, think we're actually describing reality, we're missing the mark. We're making an error. So we describe time according to the A series because that's how we experience reality. But time is not actually a part of the universe. Well, if it is a part of the universe, it's like a feature of our consciousness. It's not like in the world out there, if that makes sense. Our perceptions of the present seem to vary. We've talked ad nauseum already about how events seem longer or shorter to you depending on the event that it is, your mood and all of that. So we know our perceptions of time differ. We know that things seem to have different duration depending on our point of view. And it doesn't seem like we could know if time is an objective feature of reality, given all that we have access to are our perceptions. So it seems as if one could make the very bold argument that any description of reality is kind of a logical leap. But you don't have to believe that. That's just what some people have come to believe. Thus, time as we know and understand it is not real. It's not a part of reality. Reality, in other words, is not actually temporal. It's an illusion. It's an error. It's not really what we think it is. What do you think? Are you convinced? Yes.
What I was kind of thinking about is like things that show like an existence of some sort of time, like expirations, like an apple expires, or like metamorphosis, like things that we can like patterns that we can like objectively see. Like more of an experience than like a measure.
That's what a lot of thinkers would say, right? They would say, look, you're looking at reality. Let's say you're looking at an apple. Okay, let's see if I can draw an apple. Already starting off terribly. Something like that. Is that an okay apple?
Sure.
I don't know. This is shitty. But anyway, we have an apple, okay? And you'd say, okay, at time 1, it's a nice, red delicious apple. The worst kinds of apples. And then at T2, you would say, oh, look, now it's all rotten and, oh, it's bad. Ooh, look at it. Oh, the shape is, ooh. Even the leaf is, like, messed up, right? And you might say, well, like, look, time is a feature of reality because this thing changed as time progressed. This thing changed. It actually changed. But notice what a lot of philosophers are saying. Notice what McTaggart is going to say due to his idealism. This is a perception. Okay? This is a representation in our minds. So, we're stuck with the representations and the thoughts that we have. We think that they actually clue us in to what's going on outside our own heads. But we can't get outside of this box. So, I mean, we can't really know, I would say, if time is a feature of reality, because we're stuck in the mode of perceiving the world such that it looks that way. And we don't know if it is really that way or not. That's how things look to us, but we can't stand completely outside how things look to us. You might think we can, because you're like, well, why don't we look at things subjectively? But you're still looking at the world through your mind, right? Yeah.
Like, also what trips me up with just like the dimensions that there are, like, in this current moment, every word I say is like, the word I just said before was in the past, and now that I'm speaking is in the present.
Right.
What I'm saying is now in the future. Like, how even when we speak in sentences, it's all past, present, future, but like we're in a present moment.
All we are experiencing is the present, right?
Yeah.
That's what some people say.
But at the same time, we're not, because everything I'm thinking and saying is also the past and present.
Right. So some people say the present is the only moment that exists. All you are experiencing is the present. But look, it takes time for your brain to process information. So really the things that you are seeing is not what's going on in the present, it's what was going on a millisecond ago or whatever, right? So you could arguably say too, everybody's living in the past. But at the same time, everybody's only living in the present. I don't know. How do we make sense of that? It's trippy.
We're calendars. Because a lot of people believe that we're not actually living in the year that we are, because they kind of just made a guess. Like, you know, like, no one, do they like really know?
Well,
when
the
year was?
We don't know for sure when the ancestors of humanity came into existence. We base our calendar system on the birth of Jesus. That's what AD means and BC means, right? But the Jewish calendar is different. According to the Jewish calendar, like the Earth is like some sects is like 6,500 years old. We're not living in the year 2024. We're living in 64 or 42 or something. But yeah. So we've come up with a way of tracking change, tracking the motions of the planets and the sun. But McTaggart would say this is like a category that we've placed on reality. This time thing is not a feature of reality. And this leads us into a whole bunch of other questions as well. And I'd like to get your thoughts on these, because these are hard to work out. And philosophers have been, and scientists have been debating these for centuries. So let's start with an easy one. And when I say easy, I really mean none of these are easy. Is time relative or objective? You think it's relative? Why do you think it's relative?
If something should happen in, let's say, an instant on the outside, we're all aware of it simultaneously. If we're in a given, if we're like confined, or we're open to the internet, or so on.
Or you see it firsthand, right? But yeah, I mean, some philosophers and scientists bring in this model of perceiving of time and information flow called light cones. Have you heard of this? You can perceive an event if you are, well, if you are close enough to it spatially, but also only within the distance light could travel, because nothing can move faster than the speed of light in that instant. So if you're outside the light cone, well, you're not going to be able to perceive it. But we know that time and mass seem to have a strange relationship, such that time moves slower when you're standing around massive objects. Time moves like a billionth of a second slower if you're standing next to the Pyramid of Giza. Same thing if you were to, if you've seen the movie Interstellar, you know about this, right? When they go down to this planet that's orbiting a black hole and they come back, and it's been 20 minutes according to their own experience, but they were gone 20 years from the reference frame of the person on the spaceship. So our physics tells us that time is relative. But at the same time, we want to say objective things like the dinosaurs are objectively in the past. No amount of, speed of light travel is going to change that. So I don't know, is time relative or objective? Maybe this question presupposes that time is a thing. And if you've given up on that, you're just going to say, well, it's relative to everybody. It's relative to how fast you're moving, what frame of reference you're in. Whether you're next to a heavy massive object, like a black hole or something. Yeah.
One time in high school, a teacher, it was a sociology class, was trying to explain light years to our class, because we were just talking about that. And he said something along the lines of, like, if another planet was to basically view our planet right now at a certain distance, they would see dinosaurs on our planet.
Right, yeah, because it takes light for light to travel, yeah.
And, like, I just think that's insane, because that means that certain planets that we've tried to look at, I know that a telescope just came out where it actually can capture somewhat of a better image of that, yeah. But, like, before that, every time we would look at a planet, aren't we just looking at their past planet?
Yes, and that's still the case today, because it takes time for light to travel. And so when you look up in the sky and you see stars shining, what you're seeing is light that was radiated from those stars thousands, if not millions of years ago, that is just now reaching your eyes. So yeah, maybe that provides support for the idea that time is relative or something. Or maybe we could get around that by saying it depends on your frame of reference.
Yeah, because then it would also, that argument could also back up how there could be light on planets around us that we just can't see because we can't see their present state.
Right. They haven't been along long enough for the photons reflecting off of them to reach us. If we could actually see into the planet, right, and see them walking around and stuff, or whatever. Yeah. Okay, so that's an interesting question. If you want to read more about that in modern philosophy, look at Isaac Newton, Leibniz, and so on. We've already talked about the other one. Is it really a feature of reality, or is it a structure of perception? That's what this whole article is about. How about this? How long is an event? What do you think? What boils up for you when this question is asked of you? How long is an event? What thoughts spring to mind? Okay, depends on what kind of event. Like what?
I don't know, like maybe a wedding or like a party or something, compared to like, I don't know, maybe like a class session or something. I mean, just
yeah, right. Yeah, you could say there are a lot of different ways of dividing up the world into events, right? For example, we could call this its own event. The time that we spend in here today. I was in class. That was an event. How long is that? An hour and a half. Or we could call this an event. Right? There was an event. Okay, so maybe it depends on the kind of event that we're looking at. Maybe? Okay. Does it make sense then to... Do we have like an objective standard to do that? Or when we do that, is it just all relative and context dependent? Is there an objective way of dividing up the world into events? Or are what we label events just our subjective categorization of the world? Because things happen in reality, right? There are supernovas, there are accidents, there are vibrations, excitations, chemical reactions. Stuff is happening, but maybe our interpretation of what's happening is always relative or subjective. I don't know. I think this is one of the less interesting questions. How about this one? This is a great one. Are all times equally real? Is the present moment real? When I'm doing this, is this real? You're like, yeah, you look like a weirdo. Is the past real? Is the future real? What do you all think? Yeah.
I mean, that's what I was kind of thinking about is like future and how like we can perceive the past, but we can't really perceive the future like how we can perceive the past.
Sure.
So like, and also like how we've been talking in like other classes, like how like perception is really the only way to know if something is real. So like, if you can't perceive the future, you can't know if it's real.
Okay. So one view is the present and the past are real, but not the future. Or maybe you believe the present is real, but not the past or the future. Or maybe you believe they're all real. They're all equally real. I think probably most people believe this. The past and present are real, but not the future because it hasn't happened yet. Well, what do you think? Yeah, what were you going to ask or say?
Well, I was going to say, but you could also like argue that the present and future are kind of simultaneously happening. Because like what I'm saying right now is the future because what I just said 2 seconds ago was the past. So like this is ahead of what I just said.
It is, yeah. Although we could think about that along the B series, right? We could just say the words came later.
Yeah.
We don't have to invoke a past, present, or future. But yeah, maybe. If you think time travel is a thing or will be a thing, you better hope all times are equally real. Otherwise, where are you going when you go to the past or the future? Right? What, are you just going to show up and there's nothing there? Doesn't seem to make sense. right? It would seem that our ideas of time travel and our media presumes that all times are equally, this should say real, are equally real. Right? Because if the past isn't real, because it's already happened, where are people going when they travel back into the past? Or if you want to, go into the future, where are you going if that time isn't real? So maybe we need to make a distinction between what we perceive and what is real. You don't perceive Bangkok right now, but it's real, right? You don't remember your own birth, but that was real. It was a real thing, right? You're not going to perceive the day you get married, but for many of you, that's going to be real. That is real, right? So, what do you think? Are all events equally real? We just don't have access to all of them?
We can't guarantee anything in the future. I think that's why people probably don't think it's real, because it's not guaranteed.
Right, and we have some sort of record or memory of the past, so we're like, yeah, that happened. Right? And then we're living in the present. So, I think the present is real. I think there's stuff. I think stuff is happening now. Yeah, it's a weird question, right? But depending on your answer to it, that's going to bring up some weird ideas about what time is. For example, if you believe that the present and past are real but not the future, you have some sort of view of time in which you think like this is all real and makes sense, but like there's nothing beyond the present that exists. But then how do you reconcile that with the present always changing? Things becoming the present moment. Right? We plan. We're like, yeah, I'm going to apply to graduate school and I'm going to get in because my application's good. We're like, yep, me going to graduate school at Boston is in the future. But if this isn't real, what sense does it make to plan for it? Because it doesn't exist. But you still make plans, so it seems as if that picture doesn't describe how you live in the world. But then if they're all equally real, then what is time? Is it just like a moving spotlight? I guess it'd be going like this. And if that's a picture, what the hell does that mean? If all times are equally real, does that mean time travel is possible? Are there other reasons for thinking it might not be possible? This stuff fucks with your head, doesn't it? Does with mine, at least. Okay, 2 more questions. How about this one? I read a paper on this one and wrote a paper on this one when I was an undergraduate. Here it is. Can there be a changeless time? Hypothetically, is it possible for there to be a point in time in our universe where nothing changes? Think about what that would imply. If nothing changes, that would imply there's no motion, there are no chemical reactions, there's nothing happening. Is that a possibility in our universe? It seems to be a logical possibility, right? Why not? Why couldn't there be a changeless time? None of our rules of logic seem to undermine that possibility. But notice what happens if you admit that there could be such a time. Things are changing. Oh, all of a sudden everything stops. There's nothing happening in here. If there's nothing happening in here, how does it get started up again? How does anything start happening again? You see the problem? If there's no transfer of energy, if there are no reactions, if there's no motion, if all of that stops, how the hell could stuff start happening again? Would we have to believe in a God who, kickstarts it? Who's like, yep, there it goes.
I think it could be both at once, because if you believe that when you die that nothing happens, like you just see black forever, and your body is just your body is changing until it's completely disintegrated to bone, but once you're at that level, there's no more changing for you.
If you don't believe in an afterlife, right? Or
yeah. But even you can argue that your soul goes somewhere, but your body is just never changing. That's just a fact.
Right.
After you die, maybe your soul goes somewhere in a different time or whatever, but your body just stays.
Okay, well, let's talk about that for a second. How do people imagine heaven? Don't people imagine heaven as if there's stuff happening? There's worship, there's singing, there's joy. That would imply there's some sort of conscious state that you are experiencing, right? Okay, so it's somehow stuff happens in heaven, but most people don't think heaven is inside of our space-time. They will use words like eternal, eternity. What is that? Is eternity the same as never-ending time, or is it something different? Is it a time outside of time? What the hell does that mean? I don't fucking know. So, yeah.
So this is essentially arguing that the past is a constant motion.
Oh, that's very interesting that you bring that up, because don't we say that the past is fixed? So is it fixed or is it not fixed?
Well, I don't know how to change the past.
We can't change the past, right? Except in time travel movies and TV shows, and then they fuck everything up. But a lot of philosophers think you can't change the past because it's already happened. And if you did go back into the past and something happens, you could be the reason the thing happened, but you can't change what happened. Like, for example, when you're a little kid and you're at the hockey championships, you're 9 years old, okay? And you're out there on the ice, and all of a sudden you hear, "Oh!" And you look and you try to hit the puck and you miss and you lose the game. And then later when you get older, you build a time machine and you're like, I'm going to go back in the past, I'm going to make sure I win that game. And you show up to the game, your future self goes back into the past and your adult self shows up to the game. And you're going to give yourself a word of encouragement and you go, "Hey!" And your voice gets caught in your throat. And your younger self misses the shot and you were the reason it happened the whole time. Right? This is interesting little thing that a lot of time travel stuff uses as an narrative device. But that's kind of how philosophers think about it. The past is fixed, but if the future is always becoming the present and things are becoming more past, does that mean the past is moving? You know? Because 1856 is going to be more in the past tomorrow than it is today. So what does that mean? I don't know. I don't know. So it looks like we haven't gotten any closer in answering this question. I don't know. Could there be a changeless time? Seems like it's a logical possibility, but then if everything did stop, how would it start up again? And then how about this one? This one's a real confusing one. What is the contemporary scientific view of the theory of our universe? The Big Bang. And what is the Big Bang responsible for creating? The universe, everything, including space, including time. How could time have a beginning? To talk about the beginning of anything is to say that it starts at a certain point in time. But if time didn't exist before the Big Bang, how could the Big Bang happen? How could time start? Oh, what do you think? Does it make sense to talk about time having a beginning or an end at all? This is why a lot of people, well, some people who believe in the Big Bang think the only way to explain how that would happen is if, like, God kickstarted it or something. Some sort of all-powerful God that exists outside of space and time that could get the whole thing going. But to turn back to the original question, how could there be a beginning to time? If I'm understanding our scientific views correctly, this is what it stipulates. But I could be wrong. Maybe what it's saying is, maybe it's saying time was always around, but its nature suddenly changed with the Big Bang, or something like that. But then the question becomes, if the universe has always, if something has always been around, how or why did everything come into existence at that particular point? And what caused that? Why not any other point? How did that work? I don't know. We can't witness the Big Bang. Maybe if we could, we get closer to answering this question. But this seems like a real puzzle. I don't know how to make sense of it. How time could have a beginning. How it even makes sense to talk about it. But that's what our views seem to imply. So, a brief foray today into the philosophy of time. Hopefully you learned something, at least about the article. You're probably going to leave with a lot more questions than answers, but maybe that's the characteristic of a good philosophy class. I don't know. Does anybody have any questions, concerns, comments? Okay. I will see you all next time. Have a good day.